Hello, I'm making this video just in case it actually comes in useful for someone, in some way that, at least you feel like someone else apart from an expert, um, actually relates to you in some way. I've got a cocktail of different diagnoses, or not all official, but there comes a point where it just seems pointless to even try to chase everything up. I know enough about myself in certain aspects to say what they are. But anyway, so the main things that, by the way, I'm in a shared accommodation, so if I stop the recording, it's because I don't feel comfortable. But yeah, I was diagnosed with Inattentive ADHD and Autism is in my notes. I don't know if it got officially diagnosed or not. I was told it is that I've got it. It's on my notes that I have it, so I don't know if that's official or not. I came to the conclusion myself as well that I seem to have autism. I do match up, but functional, I would say. Not to a point where I would classify it as a disorder, same as I wouldn't necessarily classify my ADHD as a disorder as such. It causes problems, but of course I just see it as a brain type rather than a disorder. Not that it can't become a disorder if depending on your environment. If your environment suits you and you have these symptoms, then it can work, but it doesn't work for me. So I mean, it is a disorder in that sense, but all right. So the other things that make my life a living hell is depression. Now, I get depression all around the year generally. It can come up fairly often throughout the year and can get pretty bad. But in the autumn, winter months, like it starts usually at the end of September, and it'll go, a bit into spring, and I'll start coming out of it. But that's me coming out of the worst of it. So yeah, it gets pretty dark, like, because I also have suicidal ideation, and I've had that since about the age of 5, and so I personally do not see myself living to the next year. Then that's not any kind of attention seeking. I'm 40 now. I don't particularly want to see 41, to be honest, but I feel like this every year. So I'm not trying to like garner any attention from that at all. But my depression does get very severe, and along with my suicidal ideation, it's like knowing that I have that option kind of, I guess, maybe is what gets me through it. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't get me through it functionally. The only thing that actually keeps me going is, like, past that, is that I don't want to cause hurt. If I could go without causing any hurt to my family, then I would. But that's always the tricky part. I'm one of 14 from the same parents, so there's a lot of people that are close to me that would get hurt, and I've done my best over the years to get this far. So it's tough, and that also, having a lot of siblings also like plays into my mental well-being. And you can, there's pros and cons to it. Like, cons would be, the fight for attention, and necessarily you're going to get emotional neglect, and that's one of the types of neglect that people find harder to understand that they may have experienced, because like you can be fed, clothed, and everything, looked at, all your needs met. You could not necessarily have been abused in any way, physically or anything, but it just may not have been like, no one seeming to care about how your day was, or asking questions, or giving guidance, or individual attention that kind of validates how you think. And um, you know, I don't know much about this particular subject, but I've heard something about 3 different variations of how you can like develop from that. And for me, it would have been like I wasn't noisy, so I didn't get attention that way, and it was like, I guess, wanting to do good for people was the way of me actually being visible. Otherwise, I felt like I was invisible. Um, so, I became the kind of, I don't know if empath is quite the right word. Like, although I do think that, I'm definitely sensitive to other people's emotions, and I can pick up on things. Um, so, I'm not saying necessarily I pick up on everything, but it does have an impact on me. I'm very sensitive to that. Um, but yeah, that kind of like emotional neglect, and it's not one of those things that's done deliberately, and I'm sure they didn't even notice that. I always felt like I was being ignored when I was speaking. Um, didn't feel like anything I had to say was important, and yeah, I never got guidance. I never was given direction in life. I never got given a way of um, finding my own way to find direction. The thing is, like, we're all a framework built upon the physical brain that we have, and like, so your physical brain, like, say for instance, an autistic brain is a physical type of brain, same as like ADHD. There's a physical type of brain. It's there's different thoughts on how that comes to develop, and then there seems to be different ways in which it does. Um, like for instance, one of them is like with ADHD, um, is not being nurtured closely, given like hugging, like human touch. Anyway, that's based on like the studies that they did with mice years ago. They found that it impacted the dopamine levels and stuff, not having that contact. Um, so I don't know much more than that, but I know that they drew correlations from that, and it had an impact on the growth of the dopamine receptors. And so the lack of having that is one cause, well, thought to be one cause. There's definitely a correlation, um, from my understanding, that is relevant. So anyway, so there's the physical brain that you've got, and like that has to be whatever your framework is that you build up, that leads to like a personality disorder or just a healthy personality, whatever it is. Some people in the same situations will make it a great patchwork of like how things can work together to make them, ways of thinking can work together to make them function as a human. I have built up a very shoddy framework. My brain is made up of that, and it's really crap. So I'm just kind of doomed with it. There's no way forwards. I mean, for me, like as a person, I don't see a way of getting out of my own hell. I've learned a lot that can help people, but for me, it's too long to go into, but I'm that far down this spiral in my life that there really isn't any hope for me. But I have definitely found things that are useful, and I think, well, if some people only have part of the problem that I have, and I'm not saying I have anything worse than anyone else, because I don't think that at all, but I think some problems, some of my tips might actually be useful for people that aren't lumbered with my particular set, and they may have one or two types, and so that is something that I'll probably want to share as well. I did write up something, a fairly long piece with tips on a YouTube comment. I copied and pasted it into my Samsung notes, and just in case anyone else would want it, because it had a lot of positive feedback and people really seem to find it helpful. So if there's a way I can make that something that more people can see and it's helpful, then I think that gives me some kind of like meaning, at least, even if it is just a one-off type of video. I don't know, and to be honest, there's a lot of depth that we've gone into, but anyway, I don't want to go into that. Just trying to lay out something that you might relate to, really, and me going off like that on tangents and stuff is just, that's normal. So avoidance personality disorder is something that I suffer from. Like, I'm down as having like social anxiety in my medical notes, but I've mentioned it to the doctors, but they're not going to take it seriously. The money doesn't go into researching it because it's not destructive disorder. So like, the other personality disorders in the cluster B that are more harmful to others, that get the research money, but AvPD, or Avoidant Personality Disorder, is not one of them. And that's a cluster C anxiety disorder. But yeah, so it makes me very avoidant. So life is very isolated, and like one of the features of AvPD is like that you actually want to be around people to some degree. There is, I mean, being an introvert, there's always that part of wanting your own space, but wanting the ability to be able to get on in groups and like be part of something, and not for there to be any weirdness or anything. Like, that's kind of a dream thing, but I've come to accept that that's not where my life's going. It's a pretty pervasive like disorder. Like, personality disorders basically are pretty solid. Like, if you imagine like so you got your physical, I'm going off on a tangent again, but your physical brain, there's nothing you can do about it, really. I mean, ADHD medication does actually help because of the way it gives something that would be lacking otherwise, and mechanics are not exactly 100% known how it works. But anyway, there's some workarounds, but you can't change the fact that your brain is stuck like that. And then as your very early life, like your brain is developing like the software, in a sense, for your thinking for adulthood. So once that software is like there, it's very solid, very rigid. it's not really something that's malleable. I'm not saying things can't be changed. I don't know whether that can or not. But then also there's like later on as you go into adulthood, and there's like, you know, disorders that you get from there, and it's pretty much like you're stuck with that for life. And I'm not trying to say like that it means you necessarily are, because I really do not know. But what I do know is the bottom layer is rigid. You're not changing that. You might do frameworks to work around, and that's what you've got. The next layer, very solid, hard. The chances of like being able to change that itself, because it's such a core, like fundamental level of how you think, I think it's going to be workarounds. I don't think you can change that, but I think perhaps there is, you know, a way around it. But then, you know, the third layer, the personality disorders, I think it's more hopeful, but there's going to be a hell of a lot of effort to make that happen. So, so you know, I'm not an expert, but that's my take on it. Anyway, so I went on a little rant. That's probably my low working term memory going into play there. Very distractible. So yeah, so sometimes like with emotional neglect or other things, like you can blame your parents and things like, but you got to remember, you know, some things are genetic, and it's not everything is just down to the upbringing. So, and that's, you know, and some of their actions are informed by their own sets of problems that they've had from their parents, and it all goes back, and the blame can keep shifting backwards and backwards. Basically, it's human nature. If something's common, it's human nature, and that's common. It's part of human nature, and I think understanding that can be healing in some way, and like gives you the ability to, instead of blaming everyone around you for doing things that you don't like, that, you know, it's just so common, it's just human nature. It gives you that ability to think, okay, no point being angry at human nature as such. Like maybe that gives you the tools to be able to think of how you can make workarounds, or you know, ways of thinking, solutions that you can use your understanding of what is actually going on, what is human nature. And and one of the examples I'd give for like being beneficial in that is for someone who's a walkover, or someone who's a walkover, and you know, and I'd say that was me. Definitely not so much now. Like, not saying it's not possible, but I've definitely learned to change my ways, and that was through some thinking about fundamental like certain things that I found that you needed to understand in order for you to naturally play out in a way that things that, for your mind to naturally like start coming up with ways of thinking that are healthy for setting your boundaries. Part of that's because of motivation. Like part of what your motivation is when you're people pleasing is to do good for people. You want the best for them. But when you can understand that actually what's best for them is not necessarily done by pleasing them, and that by establishing your boundaries, it's part of something that's better for other people. When you start understanding that, and I can go into quite a bit of depth on that, but when you start understanding that, it completely changes like you from being like a walkover. You won't be a walkover after that, because it's depending on if you're like me and you're someone who has that motivation of wanting to do good for people. That if that's the motivation you have, then my way of thinking, I can break it down, will potentially be like life changing for you in terms of that. Which I hear a lot of people, you know, a lot of people have like confided in me one on one, and told me about how they struggle, with being like a walkover and stuff. And I've seen people change a bit. It's you don't always get time to have to fully break things down, but certain truths, when understood, will just automatically play out something different in you, because it's changed kind of your software in a sense, like your way of thinking. Anyway, I can't stop going off on a bloody tangent. So I just wanted to get those things out. And two other things is I'm a hoarder. I mean, that's something that I found out 20 years ago, something like that. I realized, maybe not quite 20 years, but I realized that's something that I have. And so I've always kind of tried to combat that, because I knew it's something that gets worse with age. So I do try and keep on top of that, but I know it's a part of me, and it can get out of control. But at least I have a defense mechanism there, because I know it's something that exists. It was, at least at the time, thought to be part of OCD, not the same as OCD, but perhaps a variant, or perhaps a common comorbidity. Right? So, and the other thing was in my childhood is I had selective mutism. So speaking to people that I didn't know, I just couldn't. I was very, very, very quiet. I was fine with people that I clicked with, fine, but anyone else, I just couldn't speak. It was just like I was locked in by this fear of what people will think. So there's a lot of factors here that play into how I've developed as a person to be who I am now, for better or for worse. For me, for worse, for sure. I would say for other people, for worse as well, because I think I'm more of a hindrance for others, really, than anything anything positive. Anyway, I've rambled on too much, so I've made the video too long, which just ends up making it worthless if it's too long. Because if you don't feel like watching it, you don't watch it. So I'll talk about what it's Anyway, I've rambled on for way too long, so I'm going to put what is, my experience of these things into a different video. Anyway, so I'll put my experience of these things into a different video. I think that'd be better. So if you want that, stay tuned for more.